education. Yeah, here we go. Now, education. Education is one of the areas of potentially government. What we want the government to do, and education is the creation of human capital. So we're talking about the creation of human capital. It is, I call it a lot of times it's called positive externality. I call it difficult positive externality because education is one of those things. It's like with government. When you do it good, it's very, very good. When you do it bad, you fudged over your nation. And so we look at the creation of human capital, making people do things. Now, when we look at education, and I apologize for any knows. When we look at education, again, the creation of human capital. In fact, a lot of economists say if you have human capital, everything else is going to fall into place pretty quickly. We still need markets and a number of other things, but you need people who can use the things. Remember I talked about when we talked about time, resources, money, stuff like that, and the fact of the Soviets burnt through trucks, tanks, equipment like brutes because they didn't have human capital. They didn't have people who know how to maintain, repair, and do stuff like that. In fact, a number of countries today stay poor because they lack human capital. In terms of the idea of maintenance is just lost on people. But human capital is considered one of the main keys of creating economic growth. You get human capital, people can build more. In other words, I can get the machine, I can get the cotton gin. Do people know how to use the cotton gin? Not just invent it. Eli Whitney invented it. That's nice. You have people know how to do it. I mentioned before, a big advantage the United States had. Remember, do it yourself? Part of that's human capital. Americans could do a lot of things themselves. So go back to Revolution, which I've used a few times. Americans could shoe their own shoes. They could tan their own leather. They could, produce and make a lot of things. Sure, you'd go to somebody for ironworking or a rifle or something like that. But a lot of the other things they could do themselves. We think of whittling as being a cutesy thing people do. You go back to, I said, the Revolutionary War days around there. Whittling was a way of making fine wood items. I need an axe handle, I'll whittle one. Take a log and I'll whittle it down, I'll cure it, and boom. Then I'll insert it attached to my head. There we go, axe handle. I'll whittle and I'll make my own wood. We have, log cabins, but log cabins developed into panel housing because of the fact of you want to get that solid wood basing in, not just for the aesthetics, but because it's more durable. It's not susceptible to the elements, basically insects and stuff like that. That's human capital. Human capital feeds in labor productivity. Workers produce more, you can produce more, you get paid more. Boom, we love that. That's why a lot of times the economists will be like, yes, human capital, give us more human capital because it raises wages, it raises productivity, we produce more goods or services in which we get two for. Humans are being paid more because they generate more. We have more supply of goods. More supply of goods pushes prices down. So we're getting paid more because we produce more, and we're pushing prices down because we produce more efficiently and stuff like that. We people are winning. Okay, how do we get our money's worth? How are we getting our money's worth? And this is a question, and I mentioned the parentheses is going to be easy to lie. And this comes a sense of we know what we want. We want people to be well educated and can do things. How do we achieve that? How do we get it? And I use South Korea and Finland here because both tend to rank up very high. They tend to seek out what works. And as least speaking, now what works seems very simple, but it's the idea of because we have the difficulty of the people receiving the benefit are children, and the people paying for it are adults, we got an externality problem. And we're looking at it run by the government, which is going to double the externality problem, or square it to be most accurate. But they're both in. This is the policy the United States followed. Was the 5 things I'm going to mention, the United States followed rigorously until the 1960s. In other words, the old system of way education was done was developed through 6,000 plus years of human history. Okay, maybe 5,000. How to do it? We follow these ways. We do it this way. Why? We figure out how it works. It was the long, so would say, the dead hand of the past clutching our present to keep us from being stupid. I'm not being foolish or anything like that. I'm pointing out. Okay. Criteria proven, of course, in human history live the best education. Merit. Merit is easy. Merit is advancement, improvement for students based on ability. You advance based on what you do. Why are you first in math class? You get the best math scores. Why are you first in English? So it's everyone's advanced next level is based strictly on merit. There was no worry about do I have this item or that item, or do I have the right number this or right number that? No. It's just merit. We judge everyone by merit. Which, remember, merit reinforces equality under the law. Merit says I will judge everybody by what they do as individual. You could be from the poorest family. Merit says, did you earn it? You could be from the richest family. Merit says, did you earn it? They're judged by their actions, and knowledge reinforces equality law. Fantastic. Access. We let anyone in. Anyone who has the ability can come in. We open the access. We give everyone a shot. Everyone gets a chance to go through and surge at it and get there. Because we want people cut out. Not just the idea of cutting people out so they have a chance, but the more people have, the more these people we have, those are more brains, more capacity, more people who know what they're doing. That magnifies productivity. That raises them. I want to raise the poor up. Guess the best way of raising the poor up is good education system. Because they can do more, they can learn more, they can achieve more. They have more productivity. You get more productivity. You produce more. You earn more. You get paid more. Yes. So access. We want everybody in. We want to bring the whole population, give them all. Whole population has greater human capital. Now keep in mind, whole population is not going to do everything the same. Quality. Now, everyone says we always stress quality. Now the difficulty is knowing if you're achieving quality. That's always difficult because the system will lie for its own ends. Realistically speaking, you want a quality education. You're stressing the best. They can do math. They can answer 50 math questions in 15 minutes, stuff like that. We're pushing for higher quality. There's a common falsehood, a common fallacy that, more money reaches higher quality. It does not. Less money also does not mean higher quality. There's a lot of times, at least in the United States and in other countries, more money does not yield a better education system. And it's very weird that way, particularly when you track over time, like over decades and stuff like that. It's not saying there should be more in education. I'm pointing out the difficulty. How do we achieve quality? How do we get to where we want to get to? How to make it so everybody can read and write and do math and stuff like that. Read, write, and do math at 12th grade level. What works? Education is difficult to run. We have no easy measurement standard. As we're going to see when we go through the problems of education, we have no simple, easy measurement standard to say what is happening or how is education going. So we revert to what works. How does it function? In other words, the long history of humanity has figured us how to work. So we figured out how to do things. How, because it's difficult. So I have this quote here: if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Now a lot of people use the economic quote because it shows how change for change's sake, particularly education, can be very stupid, especially when it's run by the government, because are we changing the right direction? And in which we're gonna have in a graph in a few slices, the United States in my lifetime went from the top country in education, K through 12, to everybody laughs at us. The other industrialized countries poke their finger at us and say, "Yeah, look at the Americans; they're stupid." So if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Don't change a system you have that works. And there's no easy measurement. We say grades. Oh no. As we'll see, I'll lie about grades. As we become more amoral, more immoral, people bold-faced lie while saying, "Why do you want to hurt the children? Why are they killing the itty-bitty children? Why don't they just give education all the money it needs? They are killing the children." You get stuff like that. When so many point, yeah, but the money, the vast increase in education spending has not gone to classrooms, not gone to teachers, it's gone to administrators. The number of administrators in every school system have multiplied voraciously, and they all get paid very, very well. In other words, whereas teachers haven't changed, their salaries has matched inflation for the last 50 plus years. Administrator salaries have doubled, tripled, quadrupled, and you have more administrators than you did. Per student than you did 40, 50 years ago. Education should support and reinforce the national culture. People say, oh, you're rah-rah in the United States. Remember, national culture goes to high utility. What is right, wrong, good, evil, beautiful, ugly, stuff like that. Education needs to reinforce that because remember, economics will deal with do people like the cookie? High utility, business, firms, the government, all of them want high utility. We want high utility. How do you create high utility? That becomes the rub. You hear a lot of people say, no, well, in fact, we'll call this people are naturally good. They wouldn't exploit or lie. Really? Yes, they would, if it suits them in. It's unethical, but saying it's unethical and not lying when you could benefit or you think it'll help your side, that's where interests lie. And that's the difficulty. So it's important that question. We'll see crime reduced. The population itself is one people. We all have the same heroes, the same villains, the same objectives. All these things we hold and believe in. When they say we take these truths to be self-evident, that comes from a cultural point of view. And again, I'm not making a statement right now. I will a number of times on the national culture. It's the fact of it should reinforce other cultures that binds your population together. Now, a lot of people say, well, you should do it my way. It'll bind the education, bind everyone together. No, they don't mean that. They mean everybody else should bend to my beliefs, my ideals, and that will make a better world. So that's what they mean when they say national culture. Now, national culture is something held in common, but again, if you see heroes, your identity is good. National culture can reinforce law and order. Equality under law, again, equality law means each individual is treated the same. In fact, you're going to always have a trade-off. If you want equality of the individual, each person treated the same, you're going to have inequality of groups. If you want equality of groups, equity of groups, you're going to have inequality of individuals. So if you also once you pursue equity of groups, other groups are going to seek favor. Because remember, an equity of groups says the groups should all be the same. And that is a killer. And we finished the national culture. And look, again, this is when T.S. Eliot, education prospects community, in which we tie everyone together. Education, that creation of national utility, right, wrong, good, evil, stuff like that. That is very important to create that. And it goes back to number 5. She establishes, as I said, all those heroes, who our heroes and villains are, those things we prohibit, permit, promote. I mentioned transgenderism because that's the whole big stick thing today. But, is it good or bad? We've had candidates promoting it for first graders. But the education system should now seek people out and say, you're this, you're that. That's kind of like converting people to something. And that's the whole point. What are you doing? Okay, existing American problems. The United States spends most per head, and this is a few years old, but look at the amount per head. It's a few years old, we're spending $16,000 K to 12. Let's see if we can get a better color. And a lot of times they default to yellow just because it overlaps better. With 16,000 per head, that's higher than any of the countries do. But all these other countries actually outrank us in education performance K to 12. And so two economic theories have different solutions about how do we solve the problem of not getting our money's worth? How do we improve education? Now, an interesting problem here is the United States, at one point, we were the first in the world. In other words, I should say we were the first way back when, back in the 50s. Our kindergartners, our 5-year-olds, are first in the world. In other words, when you rank American 5-year-olds, they know more than anybody else. They even beat out the Japanese, the Finns, South Koreans, they beat them. By the time we get to 4th grade, our 4th graders are in the top, like 10, 15, they're there. Our 8th graders are in the bottom of the industrialized countries. By the time we graduate high school, we're scraping the bottom. But again, adjusting for inflation, we spend several-fold more per student. In fact, I said, you look at this is education for a child, that's adjusting for inflation. Look at the jump of this over time. The blue one's the number of children in education. In other words, we had a rise up, then you had the decline because the baby bust, the extra start because the baby boomers didn't like reproducing. And then you had the second one of the later baby boomers coming and having some children, stuff like that. New immigrants. But we were spending, if we had teacher salary here, right? If I put in teacher salary, this is what teacher salary would look like. If I put it in, it would look like that. In other words, teacher salary would be keeping pace with inflation, maybe outpacing it teeny bit. As we spend immense amounts of resources. Some of the worst schools in South Carolina, public schools, will have almost 30 grand spent per student, and it will still be bottom feeders. Okay, now the weight of other things that may be there. And again, this cartoon does have a perspective. I used it intentionally. But the other situations may crush the poor. And a lot of people want to help all the people. The reason I mention the poor is when education fails, the poor get hammered. And I'm not some Fabian socialist or something like that. Socialism doesn't work for crud. You know I hate communism. And I hate them the other social pathologies they want to put in education to cripple it. But it's the poor who get damaged most because they don't have the resources. When the system fails, the poor fail the most. The taxpayers, remember, and this is the thing with third-party education. Remember, with education, it's third-party cost. The taxpayers pay. Remember, government itself is a third-party cost. The taxpayers pay for the government program, and the kids pay when the government program fails. And so both theories are going to say, how can we achieve human capital? How can we improve things? How can we make things better? Now, go with the neo-Keynesians first, because of the fact of, again, it is the older theory. While we went through the 5 economic theories, we had the free market, with the free market, and then the market economy, managed socialism, and then communism over here because it's psychotic. Okay, neo-Keynesian theory, remember, occupies these two, the managed economy and socialism. Neo-Keynesian theory works in that framework. And it's the older of the two things we're looking at here, because those 3 middle systems are ones being used. No one uses market economics anymore. No one uses a pure market economy or the libertarian mode. That hasn't been done over 100 years. A few have done, another people range between 2, 3, and 4. 3 and 4 are linked, and 2 is, it's creature. Remember, neo-Keynesian, when we get to the 40s, 50s, neo-Keynesian was the theory. And so, the interesting thing is, remember, education was working then, so something else changed. It goes back to number 5. In other words, our culture changed, and that altered 5. And when 5 altered, because they wanted to get rid of our culture and like it, that started causing ripples to the others. In certain ways, people thought about saving the poor girl with the backpack with poverty, homeless, stuff like that. They created more of that. They didn't create less of it, which was a painful loss. Okay, so they tend to favor New Keynesians because remember the managed economy, the government submitted the plan, and socialists, they range with those two. They tend to favor the idea of a central government control and direction of education because we want education to fit into a national plan. We look at the whole economy, say, what do we need? What types of people? What types of skills? And we gear our education towards that. In other words, the idea that government's planning. When you go to a market economy, the government's not planning things out. The government's filling potholes and stuff like that, or trying to make generic education better. We're not trying to plan to the future. With a managed economy and socialism, the government's planning, looking to the future, saying who we going to need. When are we going to need them? What kind of skills and things should people develop? Where will there be critical bottlenecks and stuff like that? So the government's like looking at this large mosaic of education saying, I can make it make sense in the picture, create a greater outcome because I can control and dictate the moving parts to improve it. And keep in mind, I'm operating both theories premise. Neither theory wants to hurt people. You may be in coalitions with other people, political wise, who may be causing damage, and you have to be able to resist that. Okay, for improving the Neo-Keynesian model, they will say yes, we need more money, because more money will improve the system. They say that. I'm saying always does, but again, they want smaller classrooms. In other words, more teachers per student. In other words, you don't want a classroom with 28 students and one teacher. In certain circumstances, that may work perfectly fine. Particularly if, again, going back to high tone and stuff like that. There should be more specialty class, which neither theory disagrees with this. And this is always a sad one, in which I guess I should have highlighted, should have put this stuff on the back burner. We'd hold that one over there, right? More specialty. In other words, Neil Keynes would agree, yeah, we need more specialty classes from the up end, more calculus, physics, elite literature, stuff like that. More advanced language. We need more of that in your high schools, in your junior high schools, moving up and stuff like that. We also need more defined life skills. Shop and stuff like that. Electricians, plumbers, stuff like these things used to be taught in high school. They became a joke. Now, so this stuff, the Keynes is all perfectly fine. So this stuff over here, they are perfectly fine. That's what they want to do. The coalition of politics, the coalition nature of politics has caused neo-Keynesians to agree to things or support things that are not necessarily neo-Keynesian policy. It would be neo-Keynesian solutions. But I mention that because they have supported it. In other words, economists and people who are obviously neo-Keynesian go with these solutions even though they don't necessarily work. Okay, so let's talk about that one in terms of the coalition nature of politics has led many neo-Keynesians to back NEA solutions. Just like, for example, I'll take on the flip side, most economists cross spectrum support free trade. Being a coalition with Trump has made a number of new classicists support trade restrictions. There are other new classicists who do support trade restrictions, which is one of those things where that may, but we're going to this one. The coalition nature of politics has led many neo-Keynesians to back NEA solutions, National Education Association solutions. These are some ones. They want to ban private schools. There should be no private schools because they're making the public schools look bad. And homeschooling should be banned. Both of them should be banned because they're outside the coordination and control of the state, and they say they're diverting resources that would help more students. A point they make on this, they say a lot of times, they're stealing the cream. All these good students are being siphoned off into the private schools and homeschooling. And if those students are in the public schools, all the other public school grades would suddenly rise. Just the presence of these brilliant people would raise the grades up. Huh? Really? No. But they will say it's in terms of They don't like it being outside the coordination of the state. The government's not running it. The experts aren't running it. And it diverts resources and students. That said, they do actually say it's stealing the cream. They're taking the best and the brightest. That's why public schools look bad, because the best and the brightest were taken by the private schools, the homeschoolers. But remember, when the state's stealing the cream, the implication is saying is if these people were in the public school, not only would their scores be high, but they'd raise everybody else's scores. Not likely, but the NEA believes students should start pre-K at age 2 or earlier because at the core of it, the NEA says, parents the cause decline. Literally speaking, that's why you have all things saying, we need Head Start. Oh, if we didn't have Head Start, if we had Head Start, all the grades, everything would be so much better. Wait a minute. The United States gives our education system the best 5-year-olds in the world. And the reason our American education is stinking is because they don't have good enough 5-year-olds. They need to get them when they're 2. Then they'll make them real good. But you're getting the best 5-year-olds in the world. No, because it gives you an idea of what are they doing. See, the NEA is saying it's not our fault. They're blaming the parents. The parents are the cause of decline. The parents aren't doing it. So we need government mandates and controls on parents, which is what a lot of schools do. In fact, when we talked, one of the reasons in many countries population has declined is due to the fact that you have government control when you have children. The government says you raise the children right because government views it as their child, and so a child becomes a ferret for the state, which we're going to mention as we go through some of these slides. But the government has mandates. So, but look at the impact, and it was the way they think. It's not their fault that they are failing. It's the fault of people, other people, and they need to be rewarded with more money and more power. They've been rewarded that way. A nationally state formula to move cash from rich districts to poor districts to even out the spending crunch. Again, these concepts have been in line with the theory and stuff like that. Is the idea of the rich people, their kids are going to inherit their wealth, not just their wealth of what they have, but their wealth of what they're doing in education, stuff like that. And the poor people are going to inherit their situation of poverty because they're rich districts that have everything, and their poor districts don't have enough. And so you need to even out the spending crunch to get transfer resources from this district, where those people are, to this district. And then it'll be so much better. And so it should be a nationalist. And this is this could go back to the 90s and the noughts. We had a number of court cases that went up saying it's discrimination because you may have a town spending more in their education and another town spending less. And there'll be a court case saying, well, money should be moved from a town spending more to a town spending less to make it equal or equitable. In other words, and we should have equality of results. People say, well, it's equality of opportunity. No, it's not, because, again, education should be handled very locally. Towns determine what they spend. But people get upset with towns spend. And they say, well, the state's going to take it over. Back in a lot of states, courts ordered it taken over and would allocate it where they want to. And then the town's like, well, that's not fair. We choose where education is, and we're having decent results. In fact, when this was done in Vermont, where Vermont had poorest results was actually in Burlington, which is, run by the hard lefties. And Burlington was spending more per student than other parts of Vermont. But since Burlington had lower test scores, they should have more money. In other words, the thing with it, I have failed. The rest of you should give me money for failing. Now, keep in mind, I've removed another difficulty of government. I did not pay for my mistakes. Now you're going to have a school district. They're going to get money from another school district. I'm definitely not paying for my mistakes. I don't have to worry about it, because every time I fail more, I'm going to say, those other school districts give me more because we're suffering because there was oppression from them. And they'll say stuff like that. And this is something people say, this is something the communists taught. Because the communists, anytime you weren't teaching communism, you're oppressing communists. Now, the new classicus, again, remember the new classicus are the ones who come in response to the failure of the government. So it's the government surged in, intervened in the last section of the economy, and the government, failed. It didn't get there. It didn't achieve what it wanted to. And so the new classics say, look at this. They're going, look back at the new Keynes, neo-Keynes, and they say what? The government fails. The government has failed in education. It's worse than it was. And so the government's response is, we have failed. Give us more power. So the classics say, when we talk about last night, hey, who they blame? They blame the population. The population's too stupid. You must give us more power, more resources. So think about the incentive. I fail, I get more goodies, which means I never pay for failing. So the educational establishment does not get held. No one ever went to the NEA for the last 50 years of failure and say, you know what? The whole NEA board, you are banned for life from education. You guys have failed so epically with all your ideas, you're banned for life. No, we're the leading lights of education. We're going to beat on that one quite a bit as we go along. Don't worry. So is the education establishment? They say the education establishment is not held accountable for failing. Heck, I'll use this one. One of my daughters, she's in education, and she's like, "Oh no, the current administration stinks, but Arnie Duncan was wonderful because he went up through education." Arnie Duncan was the superintendent of Chicago Public Schools. He was Secretary of Education under President Obama. When the Chicago Public Schools, among the worst performing public schools, less than 10% of students graduate at grade level proficiency or above. The other 90% are below grade level efficiency. That guy you put in charge, oh, but he has all this experience in education. Has what? Failing? Think about that. In the private sector, if you make lousy pizza, nobody's going to promote you, put you in charge of all pizza manufacturers all over the country. Because why? You stunk. But that happens in government. That happens in education. I said, remember, the new classicus developed, this theory develops in the 60s and 70s. A few people in the 60s developing it, has to look at the expansion of the government change, doing weird things. And in the 70s, as the government fails a lot of things don't work, it comes along and comes back and develops in. Okay, now, as we were saying, I apologize for being slow at times. This theory develops because things fail. For some reason, we spent more money. Just like with many things, things went down, things failed. And it's okay. Why? Okay, so why does the government fail, especially in education? How come when the government goes in education, we see failure after failure? And at the core of it, they say education is a government-run monopoly, a twofer of inefficient evil. And this is something Milton Friedman, the bald guy I talked about before, he speculated upon this difficulty arising back in the 50s and 60s, before everything broke. He said this was going to occur, and he says, at the core of it, it's a twofer of inefficiency. It's a government-run monopoly. And being a government-run monopoly, it's going to, be doubly wasteful and inefficient because it's going to be automatically massively inefficient because you got the government, which has no measurement criteria, no easy measurement criteria, and it does not pay for failing, combined with a monopoly, which there's no other competitor. Remember, the thing is, they want to get rid of all the competitors. So you have one sell of the good, plays against the consumer, and it's the government, so it can make you buy the good and pay for the good, so you can get squeezed. Paraphrasing of a person asking a boy, so where do you go up? Because they want to be free of this socialist heck hole, what you call public schools, because it's really just double speak for government indoctrination sense. So it's going to be a problem to get to. Now, the first four difficulties, problems of education from a new classical point of view, come from this combined item here. Now, people say in the class there's a myth of other items because it's easy for anyone to say, well, now keep in mind, Alani Keynes is one who banned homeschooling in private school. I would say, well, they can just homeschool. Wait, homeschooling, you have to dedicate a whole human being, 8 hours a day plus, stuff like that. There's a lot of work there. It's not easy. Private school, money, 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 money. you're doing private school, you're paying a lot of green here. Let's just see if I can use the green. You do private school, you're paying a lot of cash here. That's not simple. Move to a new district. That's also cash. My sister-in-law and her husband, my sister-in-law and my brother-in-law, they live in one of the ritzy, like Acton, Massachusetts, one of the ritzy districts. Yeah, all their kids, that district, 98% of the kids who graduate high school going on to college. They all have good grades, stuff like that. Do you think any normal human being can move in that? No, you're gonna be bottom of the upper class to get to live in that area. Literally speaking, you're gonna be rich, and that's not an option for the regular people. And so there is no cheap or easy option. Current system, and like I said before, the current system does not like sharing power. Yes, the very powerful districts still do. Like, for example, in many places we're going to see later, you've got California basically banned, upper level math because, the poorer, disadvantaged districts don't have this. Now, when we talk about equity, they're giving everybody the box to make it all even. Well, in California, instead they took a chainsaw and cut through some of the kids' legs to make it even. In other words, they didn't improve what was happening. They hurt people. Now, for the very, very rich places in California, those places where the creme de la creme, the people in bed with the government, like Hollywood people live, stuff like that, their schools still read all the classics. Their schools still went up to calculus. Their schools did all the advanced stuff, had the multiple languages, because that's for them. Other peasants don't get it. And I said before, Chris doesn't like sharing power. So, this question, Mom, why can't I go to that school? It costs too much. And you will have the school system in the ACLU saying that would violate your civil liberties. Well, I can't someone goes to another school. No, it's oppression. Which we're getting a little ahead of ourselves by putting a foretaste there. Okay, problems that come from being the government monopoly. In other words, when I am a government monopoly, when I'm the government, I'm running it, and I'm the monopoly, I'm the only game in town, which for the vast majority of people it is. And the government likes it that way. The government mandates it that way. Is poor schools stay. They never close school for being decayed, doing a bad job. Oh, they may fire some of the teachers. And even that's like in South Carolina, they may. And New York, they just shuffle people around. But you never close school for being decayed or doing a bad job. As I said, go to Chicago. Boom, a whole school system. Epic fail. The superintendent of that school system was made Secretary of Education. Well, he ran such a large school system. Don't you know he helped advance people from being able to, teachers to be able to sleep with students and make it all okay? In this case, it was alternatively preference ones, but well, normally, if you're an adult and you're getting involved with a young teen of like 13 or 14, it's called pedophilia. I have solutions for that. There's death by hanging, death by shooting, death by lethal injection, death by beheading. People do that. Adults do that to children. I have my solutions all very consistent. No, but that was his basis for him being. Oh, that's why I should have been Secretary of Education. But it wasn't the performance because they stunk. But see, was never fired. The whole system was never destroyed. No one went through the whole top of the whole system in Chicago and said all these people in that top strata there, in the bureaucracy, you are all fired permanently. You will not be allowed to touch education. That never happened because that doesn't happen. You make bad pizza. Remember, you make bad pizza, you're dead. Concept kills you. Failure pays, which is like the previous one. Whenever school fails, the first words out of everyone's mouth is there is not enough money. If only we had enough money, everything would be okay. We just don't have enough money. And so you get the two schools here, which I often people say this. See this poor little school. It's suffering. It's got no money. Oh, this rich suburban school has got cash up to the wingy bingies. This is why this school is great because they get all the cash, and the poor urban school, the poor rural school doesn't have anything. Don't get me wrong. In many states, they quickly consolidate the, even though people in districts and small towns want to keep their little schools, the state will consolidate them so the state can save more money but create more bureaucratic slots for themselves. Interesting one, just from a few years ago. The highest performing school in the United States, this goes back, about, I think, I want to say 7 or 8 years, was one of the poorest ones. It had the highest performing school. It was just a suburban school. They were spending about $6,000 per student, way lower than the American average. Which has all the cool stuff. It has this, that, and the other thing. Yeah, but they had things they were using for 20, 30 years. They had buildings. Heck, in my hometown where I grew up, they were still using the high school. It wasn't a high school anymore. It was now being used as a grammar school. It was a building built in 1916. They still use it. In other words, they built it well and just clean it up and occasionally refurbish it. In fact, I did middle school there. The only thing sad I ever saw was when they made a whole bureaucratic building. It was a town of 30,000 people. And they actually made a building for the bureaucrats. Totally sad, totally sad. Well, they converted the school to be a building for the bureaucrats, which was totally sad. But, in terms of failure pays. Whenever school fails, the first word out is not enough money and they get more cash. No one looks at suburban school and realizes, wait a minute, they're only paying about $6,000 a year per student. But they got this, they got that, and they got the other thing. They do maintenance. They keep it up. You don't have people breaking things constantly. People stealing things. That's the sign of decay, but they actually get the most bang for their buck. Now, it doesn't mean cutting funding will improve things, but it's pointing out increasing funding doesn't either. But that's the whole thing. When you fail, once I know I failed, they'll give me more money. I will choose failure because failure gets you more money. Just on this one, when you have poor schools, right? Yes, they don't have the tax base. Although we talked already that a lot of people want other counties to pay higher taxes to give and transfer their tax to poor schools, to make it more equitable. In other words, and they're aiming for equity, not for efficiency. Everything should be, at the end, they're just saying, and they get a lot more funding from the state and the feds, but they don't get, there's no reason to improve because why? You get the cash free of hand. So failure pays. The bureaucracy, which we've been discussing, lives very, very well. In the United States, in most countries, the education bureaucracy feeds epically. They get the most in cash, they get the most in positions. In fact, many teachers leave teaching and go into the bureaucratic administration, not because they really want to, but because you get pay raises. You get more money. You always get pay raises. Because think rationally. If your school system, if you cut bureaucrats, what do the taxpayers do? If you cut teachers, they give you more money. So you keep the teachers underpaid, comparatively speaking, and you keep the bureaucrats overpaid. You never cut the bureaucrats because the public will give you more money. You always cut the teachers because they will give you more money. In fact, the bureaucrats adjust themselves. This is even something simple as like, I'm trying to remember the term. Featherbedding. This is even featherbedding. Featherbedding is when you get a job that pays well for doing nothing. No, these bureaucrats justify themselves by making life, they put more restrictions on teachers, telling the teachers, do this, do that, write reports, tell us what we're doing. And then, like, teachers will spend summers now. Before, teachers would have the summers off because that was part of the compensation. Now teachers must go to these constant bureaucratic things taught by bureaucrats, in which you sit being bored by bureaucrats who think they know something when they may have, at most, taught in a classroom or school for like a year or two. But they're doing this to show, see, I am imposing control to the teachers. I am showing my power. Oh, they must. And so the bureaucrats assign more burdens on the teacher, more weight on the teacher that the bureaucrats do not pay for. The teachers do, and the students do. So we have a very heavily fed bureaucratic system. New York City has for decades, a city of 8 million, has more bureaucrats in education than Western Europe does. Is a subcontinent of several hundred million. The Europeans haven't gotten full of the bureaucracy like we do. They do have it at a national level, but they have other things that are well staffed with bureaucrats, don't get me wrong. But it lives very well. They feast amazingly. And bureaucracy protects itself. That's why things get cut first. Always teachers. Things in effect. That's why schools be like, we have no money. We had to cut the nurse out because there's just no money in the schools. Okay, let's see. You got a school. When I grew up, this is what a school looked like when I grew up. You had a teacher in every classroom. You had the vice principal who wandered the halls like, just a specter out of a horror movie. The principal you never saw, you didn't know what he was doing. You had the secretary, one secretary at the front desk who handled everything. You had the janitor, and you had the nurse. There you go. But now they say, well, we can't have a nurse. We can't afford it. The reason they can't afford a nurse is due to the fact of they want what? More money. You cut out something people need. Well, we would have a nurse, but we can't afford it. Heck, I said in my old hometown, they could just eliminate the whole building that just houses bureaucrats. There you go. Well, we need the bureaucrats to do these things. No, you don't. They're a non-performing expenditure. Now, the fourth thing that comes naturally being, okay, I mentioned this one here because my daughter encountered this. Seattle area cut teachers because fewer students. And they said, well, we have fewer students. We must cut teachers. Now, it was during COVID because they kept their lockdowns for 2 years. For over 2 years because a lot of teachers like working at home and a lot of bureaucrats like working at home. And so again, but a lot of parents we're both working, we can't afford that. So they did what? They sent their kids. Sorry, lean forward so I can see where the mouse went to there. They sent the kids out to private schools, something like that, because they're both working and such. So schools would say, oh, we have fewer customers. So we have to cut teachers back because if you schools are paid through by taxes, not by someone willingly coming and hiring somebody. It's not going selling pizzas, and them workers I had depends on how many pizzas I sell. No, schools are financed by taxes, and that's where the schools are. But Seattle says since so few students we have to cut. The only thing they cut were teachers because they knew they were going to be ending the lockdowns. And when they end the lockdowns, students go to school and say, oh, look, the classrooms have 28 students per teacher. We have no money, though. You must give us more money. And that's why they did. Because once they open up again, a lot of parents will send their kids to private school and send them back to public schools. And so Seattle area was cutting the teachers with the objective. Now, this also shows, this cartoon, which is the reason I have it here, also shows the bureaucratic overhang of the bureaucracy does very well. All these special people, they're getting lots of pay because they're what? They're above the teacher, but they impose theoretical constraints on what teachers should or should not do. And I have no problem with the teachers answering to somebody, preferably, the parents or the local school board. But they get vastly paid. They make the teacher do lots of weird things the teacher may not want to do. They say, you do this, you do that. If something goes wrong, it doesn't work, the teacher gets ixnayed. They stay. And you get a new teacher and they'll harass that person. That's why a teacher, any competent teacher, will say, I want to move up and become one of these experts because why? I get paid better and no one's harassing me. And these experts don't even aid education. In fact, they help the other 6 problems you tend to have from American education that shouldn't be there, but they'll see the first 4 automatically happen from being a government-run monopoly. There is no accounting system. There is no, and this is a ruthless problem. There is no accounting system to tell how the system is doing. how the system is failing or not succeeding. There's no way of measuring. Particularly as we become a more amoral, immoral society, the system gets worse. The system goes down and decreases even more because you get, amoral and immoral. Let's deal with some of these things that were created. New Jersey, 3 decades ago, tried to create an incentive system for schools. The incentive system was actually kind of simple. If schools have less than a 70% graduation rate, they get less money from the state. If that's between 70 and 90, they get the same amount from the state. If they get 90% plus graduation rates, they get more money from the state. Within 2 years, every school in New Jersey had a 90% plus graduation rate. What's the easiest way to graduate those kids? Just graduate them. Give them a grade, give them a pass, call it a day. Change the grades to make them pass it. Well, they don't know anything. That doesn't matter. It just says make sure they graduate. We make sure they graduate. That's unethical. Remember, ethics are high utility. We lost ethics when we destroyed our high utility. We eliminated a lot of ethics. But New Jersey was trying to create incentives. Now, a lot of schools started doing the grade inflation to move things, and then what happened? Plus, you get more. In other words, theoretically, you go back to the experts. When you fail somebody, the experts come in. We must solve the problem. We will address it. We will deal with it. Which means they put more harassment on the teachers, and the teachers get more work because the experts said you must have done something wrong. We're going to correct it. We're going to deal with it. But that costs a lot of resources, and it makes the teacher's life more difficult. So teachers say, what? I'll socially promote them. That way, what? The experts don't bother me. Now, because that was happening a lot of states, in order to find out how much people actually know, real information, real data, because what is an A? An A in acting means you really know your stuff. An A in Fall River means you could just be breathing. So a lot of states started tying things to third-party tests, SATs, standardized tests, stuff like that. And then people said, that's not fair. That's oppression. And I've even heard this one. Oh, there's a test going. We have to spend a month training kids to take the test. And so that, really? These tests, the same test I did as a kid in school. Very similar. You know, when I was a kid in school, there was no a week or 2 weeks of training to see I could do the test and blah. No, it was you sat there and they said, "Foomp, here's a thing on an overlay projector, and say this is how you color in a dot. Pick the one that goes the right answer to the question. Fill the dot completely. Off you go." Now schools will spend weeks training you for the test. Well, it's because the test is so difficult, it will destroy everything. Well, no, why'd that happen? Well, because you started faking results in your systems. Because you're faking results in your systems. So, I got, the cut I tried to keep putting titration on, but all right, but they faked it. So then, in fact, a number of states got rid of the third-party tests because they didn't want them. It was making people look bad. In other words, it was making people know the system was failing, and so they just say bad things about the test. They eliminated them. In Atlanta, North Carolina, they faked scores. Atlanta, they called in a few trusted teachers to come in on Saturdays, paying them overtime when the students were taking tests, to erase the students' answers and put in the right answers so they could show the test improving. That was faked. North Carolina would, in schools would tell kids, you kids aren't going to college. Don't take the SATs. Or you don't need this test. You're sick. Virginia, 2026. This is cool. They just passed this one. This is Virginia. Graduating high school is a right. You have a right to graduate high school. No one can be denied graduating high school. Well, if a person's, chosen to be dumb as a stump, stupid, they have a right to a high school graduate. Okay, if I know I'm going to get a high school graduation, sitting on my butt and doing nothing, I may sit on my butt and do what? Nothing. because people may do that. Heck, we've had a lot of troubles on U.S. roads because a lot of people get certifications for tractor trailers who didn't know how to read. Because they couldn't identify road signs, didn't know the rules of the road, couldn't pass a tractor trailer school. They could not. How'd they get a license? Well, no mistake. Well, we're gonna make it all fair. Anyone who applies should be able to get it. Otherwise, the license is not evenly distributed. In other words, it's not equitable. It's not all the same result. So they what? They faked it. But then people what? People died because they faked it. And then when people point out people died, they said, "Oh, why do you bring it up? You just hate people. You're a hater." No. The people who hate people are letting people on the road who are killing people because they're incompetent. The people who pass those laws, those are the haters. Okay, so these four things are naturally tied in. Now, these four problems could be in check again if you have strong ethical, moral, cultural principles. They could keep those things in check. Those are ideals of high utility: right, wrong, good, evil. What do the laws of God say? This is why these principles here, these moral principles, fed back to the 5 ways you made schools work, and they would do that. But again, these values are under attack. The principle we mentioned a number of times: whose morality? We did law and order. Whose idea of right and wrong? Whose idea of good and evil? Because without a common standard of moral measure, how do we agree on high utility? How do we achieve things? Heck, let's just deal with this simple philosophical difference. I know people believe people are born good. The Rousseauian thing of they're born good, but then society makes them evil. And then there's the different kind of point where people are born with sin, and we all suffer from our sin nature. Those two worldviews are totally different. When people think someone's born good, they never do anything bad. They're good. And if you say someone's not perfectly good and wonderful, you're evil. That's why they try to demand you should accept what someone's doing that's probably evil and say it's good, otherwise we'll break your legs. Okay, with the lack of high utility and social agenda, we often see bad education turn to pure evil. Cambodian killing fields. That was brought to you by a school teacher who wanted to make a better world. Yes, he was a school teacher. He was this wonderful, lovable puppy dog who wanted to make a better world. And these living human beings are getting in the way, so we just have to kill them. Now, I mentioned this ivory towers. We'll go back to this. When professors, teachers, anyone in past education on students seeing something that's not real or wrong because they want to believe that way. In other words, it should be this way, should want it, and they teach it that way. It's funny, a good example, someone's attacking creationists saying, creationists are stupid. They start with the Bible and then say, make the facts fit the Bible. But as evolutionists, we start with the facts, then make evolution. Well, no, actually, if you don't believe in evolution, they eliminate you immediately. And the facts are made to fit evolution. Otherwise it endangers evolution. That's their religion. They are very rigid about that. It's like the whole thing we picked out with global warming. It's not we're using it for a different method. So again, they're teaching a lot of bad normatives. Students go out and act on those beliefs that don't work. In other words, if you go out there and believe the whole universe has been persecuting and stuff like that, and it hasn't been, that's what you believe. So every time you fail, I have a scapegoat. The capitalist system is oppressing me. What happens now? You may be getting this one. What happens if they have such low expectations? You do not know English. Your vocabulary is like 5,000 words, the minimum it is for a human being to function. We can have low, about 1,500, I think it is. Why is that? Well, they never had to read anything tough or difficult because that might be oppressing them. So they're failing English-wise. They can't. They do look, say, read. They can't figure out what a word means by its context. And then they don't know math because math is too difficult. Or as my dean said once, in California, they said this: math is racist. It's math. It may be arduous. It may be boring. It's not racist. Why do they think it's racist? Because that's what they've been doing. So, this impact, students go and act on things that are not real and they don't pay. Most students don't even know communism's death toll. That's why, well, communism may have killed 100 million, or capitalism killed 2 billion. There's actually, in one of my other classes, I have a PowerPoint for that. And it's good, like ridiculous things. Like World War II caused by capitalism. No, it was not. Evidentianism, um, an expansionist nationalism, a social Darwinianism, but not capitalism. They do stuff like that. In other words, they ignore these people actually dead people. Show me the killing fields in the United States where we got, stacked skulls, and we don't. We've never had that. When you got what the guy was just fired for CBS saying, they're banning free speech. We have no free. It's like, dude, you've been vomiting at the mouth, for like 40 years. And the only reason you're being fired is the revenue from your show does not exceed the cost. And, well, you're responsible. You're getting fired for it. And so that's ivory towers. It's all things that are not real. Particularly destructive. Bad normative. A lot of bad normative. Particularly a lot of bad normative on the culture front of right, wrong, good, and evil. And that does that. And so a number of these things, ivory towers are going this one. Schools will come. Now I said the first four are natural to being a government monopoly. These other ones have come about to where they shouldn't have, but they come about because of our culture war, our collision, and the culture war leads directly to ivory towerism. This should be this way because I've decreed it that way. Politicized schools. The public schools can stage now for many political, I say leftists, statists, whatever, and students, and they're brought to field support, and they favor local candidate. When I came down to South Carolina, this goes back 2002, 2004, schools would bring out elementary school classrooms to support the left of center, the left candidate running. Because they weren't going out there to support Lindsey Graham, or back then also 2 years later was Jim DeMint. No, they were going out there to support the other side, paid for by your tax dollars. So a school trip, education theoretically. Well, if they're doing education, they do both candidates now. When schools have done marches in transgenderism, who promoted that? The school system mandated. Students weren't going to do it, they're going to be punished. If you don't believe in transgenderism, you're going to be punished. That's political schools. Which goes to 6, multiculturalism, the bad type. Bad multiculturalism is when you're not learning about cultures. You're getting rid of, you're not measuring different cultures in the economic system by the same standard. You're measuring by different standards. They're all the same. They're equally good. No, they're not. I'm going to pick on Gandhi. Gandhi once said, well, I'll believe in Western civilization when they finally get one. It's like, excuse me, the civilization you were celebrating had widow burning. In other words, when a young man died, they'd burn his wife. That way, what? His family would have the burden of supporting her. Wow, truly kind. Organized slavery. A solid, rigid caste system in which a person declared inferior could not touch a superior. You could be punished up to death for touching a higher caste than you. The British wiped out all those things in India. Now, multiculturalism, there's nothing wrong with knowing other cultures, but you must know the good and the bad, and you must measure all cultures by the same standard. If you're not measuring all by the same standard, the same economic and social standard, then you can't figure out how things work. Because the idea is people get the idea that all cultures have this equal result. Why? What if you have a culture that demands, just as an item, the culture says, my kids should study 4 hours a day. And you have a culture that studies 0 hours a day. They're two different cultures, entirely different. Who's going to be running everything in 20 years? The people doing 4 hours a day, because what? They're used to studying, they're used to reading, they're used to working. The ones who do nothing, they can't do anything. One of the saddest things I found is the sense of, in the United States, The groups of the United States that read about 5 minutes a week. 5 minutes a week. That's insane. That's bizarro world. 5 minutes a week? I mean, heck, during the night, my youngest daughter who's disabled, woke up, and so I was up with her. I was reading articles. That means in the one time that when I was up and I read through things, I read more than some people do in almost an entire month. Because only 5 minutes a week. And in fact, far more they do in a month. 5 minutes. How is that? Oh, that's perfectly good culture. It's just as good as yours. No, it is not. Not if you want 6 now. If you accept responsibility for your culture, that's fine. In other words, if you do D-level work, you're down here, you're bottom feeder, and you accept responsibility, it's perfectly fine. But no, they'll teach bad multicultural when it's like, this culture's up here. My culture down there and that culture, they should be getting the same result. And if they're not getting the same result, I'm being oppressed. No. They're working 4 hours a day, learning, reading, getting better, and you're doing nothing. Okay, 1 minute a day. They're going to smoke you. 9 times out of 10, nine times out of 100, they're going to smoke you every time. You're not even going to be near them. And that's what? That's culture. That's the impact of culture. We need to measure, oh, no. It's just as good. But then that's bad knowing. That goes to ivory towers. When I say the culture fails, this culture down here that has failed, and this culture has succeeded are the same. When I say the same, I'm lying. But then I want to make them the same so I can just have the government force them to be the same. And, that's an impact. That's damage. Elite humanist values. This guy was just banned in Australian football, or handball as they called it. Okay, he was a 240-pound plus man. He went to the women's league. He was one of the better male players. He went to the women's league because, roughly speaking, he didn't like getting hit. He loved running over people, but you're 240 pounds. You're running over 120-pound women all the time. That's not even a challenge. The elite humanist values. I'm picking these values because there's a cultural difference inside the United States that has had an impact, that has done damage to our society. The acceptance of the idea of free sex. In fact, way back when they started doing sex ed, the whole thing was, no, we're not making people be sex maniacs. It's your perverted minds thinking that. What we're trying to do is so they'll learn and be better. Okay, well, what happened once they started all that? Well, sexual activity increased. Venereal disease spread more. Abortion went up. Now, they said when they were going to be doing that, and pushing more free sex, and then the idea of sex education. In fact, people said we do the gay lifestyle and promoting it. They said we don't want to do anything like gay marriage or anything like that, adopting children. You're just picking on us. We just want to be accepted. No, they have that. I think it was actually the case in Britain, which a baby boy adopted by paired male married couple. I believe he died, and he suffered abuse from them and from their male friends they farmed them out to. Okay, so these things, experience this fails. This is epically failing. Women's sports is being destroyed by men because they're in, it's just not happening. In fact, way back when, this goes back, Serena Williams when she was young said, I could beat a man. Then she played a man, the 205th ranked man. He smoked her in 3 straight sets. Now in fairness to her, she said, she goes, they'd be like, oh, you could beat him. She goes, no, I couldn't. She goes, they're faster, they're stronger, they just wear you down. She goes, it's going to be women's tennis and men's tennis. Which is nothing wrong with that. But, look at it in terms of, that change of items. has said just the whole free sex and sex ed led to the spread of diseases, the spread of promiscuity, the spread of out of wedlock births, not just out of wedlock births, but also abortion and stuff like that, to solve the problem. And then when people would try to talk about it, they'd say, "Oh, you're saying mean things, mean words, bad words, not listening." What they do? They wiped out that. You can't say anything I don't like. You're suppressing speech. In fact, heck, in England, they had all the rape gangs. They're still having them regularly. England is banning, Britain, I should say, UK, is banning talking about that because that's really the hurtful thing. Letting people know people have been raping 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14-year-old girls in large gangs because that would hurt their feelings. As opposed to, you people raping kids? You got to stop. Let's go back to multiculturalism. No, that would hurt their feelings. You're saying that their group's doing that. And so, just like trans people say, oh, transgenders, they commit, suicide so much more fast. Yeah, half transgenders think about suicide. More than half. And they attempt it way, 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 way more. To give you an idea, half of them think of suicide, about 2% of, straights. That's a massive gap. It's funny, when people realize they're not transgender, most of these studies now suppressed, but you can go back to, Nazis and stuff like that earlier. When they decided they were not transgendered, their suicide rate dropped even to the rest of the population. The rest of the population is 2%. Once they realized, oh wait, I'm not, Zagogia, whatever. I'm just a dude. The suicide rate went down because why? They're accepting what they are. Yeah, I'll even say something nice about the hippies. In the 70s, it was the whole thing of accept who you are. There's nothing wrong with being male or female or black or white or something like that. That's fine. Which is something that even goes back before then. Now it's like, well, no, I want to be a kumquat. And you all must say I'm a kumquat. And that's, think about when someone says you must accept what I'm doing and say it is good, I've destroyed equality in the law. U.S. schools teach socialism and communism, not business. In other words, our schools does not do business. They do a lot of socialism and communism. We even had a president of the United States saying, well, it's not communism to say everybody should trade, change, and share all this stuff and it belongs to everyone. That's just the way the world is. And they teach them as these things are good. But they don't teach business. They used to teach business. You go back to the 40s, 50s, 60s, and before the 40s, in the previous century, they used to teach all those business stuff. They don't anymore. Because why? That hurts the communist feelings. Because if someone's doing business or something like that, they might be making more money than somebody else. And that's oppression. So if someone making money, that's oppression because they're stealing from somebody. No. If I'm making money, it's because I make especially in the marketplace, making money, it's because I make a product, a good, or service that people want. I sell it because they want it. A good example of this, a leading board member of the NEA, the National Education, the people who set education policy, K through 12 for the United States to determine education curricula for all the education departments across the University of the United States. In 2000 said Soviet communism was better than U.S. democracy because it was more democratically equal. Are you smoking weed? I mean, you're going to be smoking weed and doing hard liquor and taking little colored pills, the ones that make you see, whatever, and smoking crack and snorting coke and down in volume. You're going to do all sorts of weird things to believe that because you know why? In 1991, communism fell. Communism collapsed. It died. It was not better. It was not more efficient. It achieved nothing. We knew it achieved nothing. This is 9 years after we knew it achieved nothing. This is 6, 7 years after the archives opened and proved. Oh, guess what? Allende was a Soviet agent. Alger Hiss did belong and was part of a Soviet spy organization. All these things will open up. They didn't work. I had a field paper rejected because in my field paper, I had stated that the living standards, that the GDP, and I mentioned this before, and I'll mention again, the GDP of the Soviet Union was not 85 to 90% of the United States. It was more likely between 52 and 55%. That is irrational. When it fell, we discovered, oh no, I was wrong. I was too kind. It was actually 25, 28%. Okay, why am I supporting it? Doesn't work. Why is my school supporting it? Because it favors the government. So the more Democrat, it wasn't democratically equal. There is no, in the United States, there is no lane on a highway that is dedicated in the middle of major cities that is dedicated to Elon Musk and Bill Gates and stuff like that. They might like that. They don't have that. In the middle of Moscow, there was a lane for party leadership. For those who rule, that was their driving lane. You couldn't go in that lane if you weren't them. They'd throw you in jail for that because you're disrespectful to the revolution of equality of all people. Bill Ayers, a former leftist communist, a terrorist who committed acts of terror that kill people, that cause damages. When it was revealed again, which everybody had known since he had been, tried and got off on technicality, and even stated he was off on technicality. He goes, guilty of sin, free as a bird. When people were pointing out again, wait, why is this guy? He got an education. He got free money and PhD in education from the U.S. government, with other people more deserving who didn't bomb and try to kill other people, who didn't. And when people said, wait a minute, this guy was a communist, he wanted revolution. In fact, he even said in 2001, actually, an article on 9/11/2001 stated, and this is again after he was a communist revolutionary, after he knew communism failed epically, after he knew the LC was destroyed, after he knew they reduced the people, everything to pit. He goes, oh, I wish I'd done more for the revolution. I should have done more actions to achieve it. Because someone asked him, do you think you were wrong? And he goes, no, I just wish I'd done more. No, he wished he committed more acts of terror against the U.S. population. And when it was revealed, now it's coming out, the whole ruling board of the NEA came out and said, no, Bill Ayers was a leading light of education. Why are they going after Bill Ayers? He's a leading light. We should be worshiping him. He had the courage and the convictions we all should have. It's like, dude, you're smoking weed. Imposing their view on the young. We are making the young believe what they want. Going back to 6, 7, and 8, most schools can come out in favor of, again, I use the transgender because it's just totally insane. Women's sports gets destroyed. No one has privacy in showers and stuff like that. And when girls object to that, particularly, and a lot of girls, especially when girls are young, and things starting, and they're like, 12, 12 to 15, they feel very vulnerable and they feel very awkward and they feel very. And when they said, I don't like this, it makes me feel weird and stuff like that, they'll call you're mean, you're bigoted. Heck, in the UK, when girls that age were being raped repeatedly by the rape gangs, that's what they're told. You wanted it. You were mean and bigoted. You were leading these poor Muslim men in their 30s and 40s into just being bad. Because, it's like, really, in fact, it was funny, the whole thing a year and a half ago about the Scottish girl who pulled out a small hatchet knife and chased off this guy who seemed to be, saying he wanted pictures of her and her sister. And then it turned out, this guy was just arrested and convicted recently of, raping minors. Virginia has now declared, if you oppose any of these things, and I was opposing the left or what they want to do, new laws, if the new governor passes stuff, that's illegal. In other words, you cannot say teaching transgender is bad. You cannot oppose. You cannot have an opinion different from the governor because that's oppression. Think about that. So that's the whole solution to things. She was declared a moderate. With marks like that, who needs psycho radicals, right? Okay, let's stop for a little bit. Okay, especially a system of people, unlike other college majors that need in the private sector. I always put out my own section. You go to the science section too and stuff like that. What we get paid, and one of our from one of my former colleagues was a VP at a major firm. I do mean a major medical firm, McKesson. He was earning over $2 million a year. In other words, everyone in the department could go in the private sector earn more money. Only in education do they earn more money being in education because all they're good at is education. I'm not being cruel. That's just the reality. So you have a set. The system of education breeds a set of elite people who only work for the government, who only make good money working for the government, and they determine things. I use Bill Ayers again as an example, but take a lot of education classes, but they know little history, little math, science, business, economics. They don't. Ani Duncan being a great example. Yeah, in education degree, he knew nothing about any function. The only reason he advanced far was because he was in politics with an education degree. He never would have been able to go out in the private sector and earn good money, not unless he was related to somebody already. The point again from soul when dealing with things, emotions either prove or disprove facts. There's a time when a rational adult understood this. Years of dumbed down education, how I feel. This is what I feel like. That's irrelevancy. I feel like I don't like the fact that I've got I'm 30 pounds overweight and I got a big chunky belly here. I don't like that, but that's reality. Because we don't let people's feelings trump reality. Okay, these are just little signs of the failures of government monopoly. I mention them, and I know this is going on real long. We can stop and stop it all over the place. It's gonna be just a video. Little signs and failures of the government monopoly. Self-esteem movement. The idea of students need to have high self-esteem. You gain self-esteem by achievement. I got there. I did this. Now you can feel good achieving anything, but achieving, moving, getting forward. Do you know what the United States today? D students have higher self-esteem than A students because A students always think they can better. D students are taught they're actually A students, but the system's oppressing them from being A students. So they're having D's. They're really smarter than the A's, and they think they are. Whereas the A's think they can do better. And that's the brutalness, especially strong in high school and middle school, which you're laying in the groundwork. In other words, A students saying got to work hard. It takes a lot of work getting A's. Some guy, a D student saying I'm wonderful already. Heck, people who have the highest self-esteem are long-term prison inmates. They have great self-esteem. Everybody else should let them do what they want. If they just let them do what they want, all the world would be perfect. Not my fault, it's everybody else's fault. And so when you have that kind of self-esteem, not results-based self-esteem of you went, you did it, you accomplished it, you had the result of your work. That's good self-esteem. That's excellent self-esteem. You have self-esteem of, you're a lazy dullard and you choose to be a lazy dullard, but you think you're brilliant and you should have everything because if you don't have everything, I'm smarter than the person. In number of states, number of cities, stuff like that, in towns, they banned recess. You know why they banned recess? It was too competitive. People engage in competitive games. They play kickball or dodgeball or they play baseball, something like that. It's way too competitive. They play soccer. That's all too competitive. There might be a winner and loser. We can't have that. Now, recess was shown, going back hundreds plus years, was shown recess was needed to relax young boys because otherwise they'll spin around in circles and cause trouble. You need to let them go off and burn off some energy, come back, they're more receptive. But they'll engage in competitive things. In that sense, implying competitiveness is good and competitiveness is bad. The idea of purple pens and calculators. They actually did this. Purple pens, they banned red pens because it's hurting people's feelings. It was endangering their self-esteem, their fragile egos, and also the idea of calculators. When calculators came in, most like acting doesn't let kids use calculators for several grades. You know, it's all these school districts that are very high performing in terms of doing other things. They don't get calculators that quickly. You know, they get them poor school districts. In fact, there was always, this goes back to the 90s, and saying there's a calculated deficit, a computer deficit. The poor school districts don't have enough of these. If they had more of them, their scores would go up. And you know what they teach the kids in these calculators? You know what they do? They'll put up, PowerPoints and say, now hit the 9 button. Next PowerPoint, now hit the, X button, which is the multiply button. Now hit the 3 button. Now hit the show thing saying the equals button. Now look up here, and that's where your answer is. That's not teaching math. In North Carolina, but in the teens, a student lost their lunch because their mother made them lunch. And it went, oh, it's nowhere near as nutritious as our wonderful school lunches. Thing is the mother knew the kid would eat that lunch she packed for him, and it was actually a decent, normal lunch. When the kid was forced to have the school lunch, which the school probably made the mother pay for, the only thing he ate was he chewed on some of the nuggets. Schools often teach that Christians and American nationalists are terrorists, but they don't even rate numbers. So if you do terrorism by numbers of people killed, Muslim terrorist. Then once you start throwing in like damage stuff like that, left-wing communist terrorist, then green nuts. In other words, the other people aren't there. In fact, the only way to get some numbers up is they'll claim people who want those were doing acts of terror. So some guy mugged somebody. That was an act of terror. It was a mugging. But then the other people who do mug them, someone for a sense of saying, get this, and using racial experiments, we don't like that. That's why they had, for like a year or two, they had, going back when you were younger, a lot younger, they had these Stop Asian Hate. But then they discovered who was attacking the Asian people, said what? Never mind. Because they're not using numbers to tell reality, they're telling fantasies. People believe them. The U.S. is the villain. No, I meant I'm an American. I love my country and stuff like that. Remember, your school system to reinforce the calamity of your nation, your people. Instead, it teaches the U.S. is a villain. Or people say, "Well, I'll have calamity when you give me everything," and say, "What's happened?" But what happened to you is something. It's a fantasy. We had a congresswoman who's from Somalia and says Somalia is so much better than the United States. Her feet have told you her mouth is lying. If Somalia was so much better than the United States, she would have stayed in Somalia. She would not be in the United States. She would not have engineered to get her family moved, other party members of her family moved from Somalia to the United States. Because why? The United States is awful for Somalis. Somalis are so much better in Somalia. Why didn't you go back to Somalia? But we teach us as the villain. But again, it goes back to that impact of communism in the thought process. You remember in communism, I want to get my new system in. I do not compare you to the alternatives. I compare you to perfection. The bullying rules have been used to oppress the politically out of favor. You have a lot of schools have bullying rules. What's stopping bullying? You know the people who know how to use the bullying rules best? The bullies. Because they'll be first off the mark saying, she said a mean word to me. Where the person who's being bullied is, quieter, shyer. In other words, to be a target for a bully, you have to be easily bullied. So the person who's doing the bullying will turn in their target and say they're bullying them. And so the other person's already on the list. So when they go and finally complain after they've been bullied, several times, it's like, I know you've been bullying this girl. You're just trying to fake it. Because remember, bullies are very selfish. In fact, bullies are full of self-esteem. They usually think, "Oh yeah, I'm just so gloriously awesome." The funny thing is that when you had the Columbine massacre, people don't realize who are they targeting? Christians. You hear about gun control, and they were all neo-Nazis. This, that. They weren't neo-Nazis. They had some, weird thing. The only thing, confirms the fact of they may have been alternatively preferenced, but don't like that answer. They were targeting Christians. Don't like that answer too. Okay, new class to say, hey, look at the solutions to solve the problem proposed by the neo-Keynesians and the NEA. In other words, the neo-Keynesians are policyholders that went for it. The NEA and the government, what do they want to do? What do they wish to do? They wish to ban homeschooling. Because homeschooling works. They want to ban private schools. Why do they want to ban those things? Because remember, just by the one, it increases the strength of the government monopoly, and two, it shows lie of what they are doing, that they are failing. In fact, over the last few years, particularly in the early part of the 20s, many cities got rid of charter schools and stuff like that, even though people in the city love charter schools. Even though people were using charter schools the most were poorer people in the cities, they were being eliminated because why? The children get a little bit, teeny bit out of the grasp of the system that's promoting a lot of social dysfunction. When I picked on starting school at age 2, the idea that children belong to the state is something that's common in the neo-Keynesian thing, or the should say the NEA, and the parents should have to answer bureaucrats. Remember a face only a mother could love. And the state uses children to spy on parents, siblings, and friends. Literally speaking, in a number of states, they will tell children into grade school to say, are your parents thinking? Are they doing what they need to do to save the planet, to encourage environmentalism? Are they cutting back? How are they living? Do they have the proper attitude? You should tell us if they don't have the proper attitude, the proper beliefs. Do they not believe in a woman's right to choose? Let us know so we can correct them. And if you give us a list of people who aren't being good, we're going to give you extra points. And if you don't give us a list, you're not going to get points. What they're doing, they're using, like the Soviet Union did, they're using indoctrinating children and using them as ferrets for the state. This is why the Green Movement has occupied education so much all over the world, is because they know they have unabashedly, it's a religious movement, and they unabashedly say what they're going to do is the best thing, and they're willing to impose on people. Okay, now the new classical solution, they like, the big problem in classical say is the fact of access. Okay, we want people to have a chance to access, going back to buy things. They said what we need to do is the government cannot make schools because the government's a government-run monopoly. So we use the strength of the market to solve the problem. What is the problem? We want kids to have a chance at education. And so we're going to enable them. We're going to use the money's going to be collected from it, are going to be used to give children a choice. See, charter schools, which is a small example of things that exist slightly out of the control of the system, have been destroyed when they got rid of the voucher system in D.C., the limited voucher system in D.C. You have the President of the United States, President Biden, come out saying, we have saved schools. We have prevented oppression. All these vouchers went to people who were poor so they could choose the school they wanted to go to. Yes, we're stopping oppression. How is it stopping oppression? In other words, when the school didn't go after trying to make things better, they went after anything that shows they are lying, that shows they are failing. And so New Classics say, no, what we need to do is the government needs to get out of school entirely. Use the market to solve it. And so you must create a voucher, a credit system, school choice. In other words, the government does not run schools. They say the government should be entirely out of school. The only thing the government should do is provide parents with the means to send their kids to school. So if the average spending is, let's just say, $10,000 per student, each student gets 10 grand. You choose where they want to go to. The government's not going to run school. In other words, the government's not involved in schooling at all because the government's inefficient doing that. In fact, the government not being involved in schools might make it easier for the government to just what? Be an impartial observer, judge, and say, check on things. But when you run the school system, you have a dog in that race. And making sure the system is protected becomes more important than if the kids are doing well. Which we can say because we can say for the last 50, almost 60 years, we know it hasn't been working well, but they're still doing the same thing. Why are they doing the same thing when it doesn't work well? Because it serves the interest of those in power. So say private. When you privatize it, I want you to remember, again, there would be no government-run schools. All the schools would be private. In other words, the government just sell off the buildings and stuff like that. You'd have thousands of new schools. And the government would give the parents the money to choose where their children will go to school, using the strength of the market to solve the problem. In other words, in the school system, you'd be creating, the demand already exists, we're giving people the wherewithal, and the supply will exist, you're creating demand and supply now. Right off, you're going to have competition. For schools to succeed, they must get kids in their school. To get kids in the school, I have to deliver better results, period. And so they're going to have to compete. In the voucher system, schools compete to get children. They will try and make better schools. They will try to improve things. People choose. Parents and students are happier because they control their destiny. Nobody can force me to go to a school that stinks or is bad or is incapable. That can't happen. I choose. If I like a school, I can leave that school and go to another one. The schools compete for me. No school can just say, hey, tough luck if your kid's being, picked on. A friend of ours, had a daughter who, she is in high school. She was being unmercifully picked on. When she reported, again, the bullies had already preempted her easily by weeks, saying she was picking on them. After Christmas, she was going back to school. The first day was so horrible, and she couldn't take it anymore. She committed suicide. Did they do anything to solve the problem? No, they did not. Because school said it was somebody else's fault. It was just a wonderful school system. We do it great. They don't remember. A mother remembers the loss of her child. School system, that's just a vagary, a shadow in the wind. See, now with this, people choose. You get choose. You can have. They're gonna have the power to pick what you want. You don't like school? Go to a different school. There's gonna be no fights over curricular, schools, what's taught, what philosophy, anything like that. Because why? The parents are choosing. If some school is teaching something you don't believe in, you don't have to send your kid there. They can go someplace else. If the school, does the Pledge of Allegiance, you love that, you can have your school there. If you have another person who's an atheist, they don't like doing the Pledge of Allegiance, they can ship their kids someplace else. Accountability. It forces schools to deliver real results. People, will flee schools, don't deliver one, two. Oh no, they'll lie, they'll fake numbers. No, they can't. See, my kid comes home from school and he or she can't read or write or add or anything like that. I'm going to notice it. And what happens? I am going to pull them and go to another school. They're going to get hammered. They're going to get destroyed. In other words, there is far more accountability. Something wrong happens, you're going to get annihilated. You'll see people fleeing. And so accountability is there. They're going to have to deliver results. They can't fake it. See, they can fake it because, again, you have that monopoly in the public schools. You can fake it all day and not worry about it. You can't when you have competition because they're going to leave. And once some people figure it out, they all figure it out. See, that's the thing about the societal wisdom where all the society's free agents. One figures out, it transmits to all the others and goes there and gets solved, which is a good thing. There's going to be less abuse. Not none. We are a fallen people. We are a fallen civilization. We have weaknesses. There's always going to be evil because we are fallen. But the big thing that's going to happen is anything goes wrong, people are going to land on it like a nail because there is damages. There is failure there. You have epically failed is what you've done. And so you'll have less of it because you won't accept it. In other words, go back to Arnie Duncan. I pick on him because he helped a man figure out how to legally sleep with a 13-year-old boy. Now, okay, if he was helping anyone to sleep with a 13-year-old, is wrong. And he was praised for his wisdom in doing this. And so, no, that's abuse. Like I said, if somebody likes that you can send your kids there. Others say, no, I don't like that. There'll be a better range of schools. There'll be schools that offer all sorts of, different niches, from athletic emphasis to languages to science to fine arts to these. There'll be all ranging of schools there, every type. Because why? How do I draw people in my school? Now, they still, they won't teach reading and writing. Oh, yes, they will. They'll teach them writing, writing, arithmetic. Because why? Parents want that. But I want people coming to my school, so I do what? I do the fine arts. I may have an athletic emphasis. I may have a bunch of guys that say, hey, we're going to do the standard thing. And at the end of the school day, we got 2 hours of athletics. If your kid doesn't have an athletics and stuff like that, we'll have them just do random things, running at times, playing various events, stuff like that. Just get her into shape. If they have a sport they'd like to do, they're going to be doing soccer. They're going to be doing this. They'll be doing that for 2 hours to train them. Because why? That's my selling point. We do academics intensely, and then we do athletics at the end to do what? To draw students in. I am once saying, hey, by the time your kid leaves 6th grade, in my K through 6 school, they're going to be teaching a second language fluently. If they're already coming in and you speak, my wife, you speak just to say Vietnamese and English, we'll be adding a third language then, because you already came in with 2. What am I doing? I'm doing a whole range of items. Education is now being achieved without government control. So the government's not running and controlling everything. It's being achieved without those government controls. The government's not in all the weeds trying to run everybody's life, trying to control everything. Instead, it's the people who are doing that. So we have no fights over this. In fact, there's true diversity. No one complains about anyone's views being imposed on whose children, because no one's being imposed. You don't like it, you can leave. So not to worry about their kids having something imposed on them. So you have true diversity, be a whole range of schools. People say, a lot of people say, oh no, they'll cause trouble. Actually, we'll go to the cause of trouble in a minute. No one's imposing anything on your children. You get to choose where they go. So this whole fight of curriculum, what's being done, nope, won't be happening. Like I always love when people say, oh, they're banning books in the library. Guess what? Every library cannot hold every book in creation. So automatically you screen out and you ban books. That's impact. There'll be more trade schools because they provide needed skills. You have a lot of people starting trade schools where, hey, because a lot of times what happens with trades now, you used to learn trades in high school, but in the 60s, among the pullback class and where people do pipes and wiring and stuff like that, we're beneath us. We are teaching the next generation of revolutionaries, and we don't do those. It's funny. The people always promote communism, look down on people who do things like mechanics, plumbing, wiring, stuff like that. Really good pragmatic. They see now a lot of times people have to go to do and get certified to be an HVAC or to be a mechanic or to be a plumber or to be an electrician. Whereas before, you could leave high school knowing how to do that. So you have more trade schools coming along because why? Some say, yeah, that's what I want to do. Ain't nothing wrong with that. And I said the modern schools are teaching classes for the stupid. In fact, that's what they did to them, in which they became, even by the time I was in school, it's going back, 5 decades, they'd already, when I was in high school, 4.5 decades, they're already teaching us like those are the classes stupid kids take. And the kids in those classes didn't learn anything. Whereas you go 2 decades before me, or even a decade and a half before me, you was just finishing up doing this stuff when my oldest brother was in high school. Their auto mechanic class. So I should say my brother-in-law, my sister's husband. I didn't want to pray for him because he's a great guy. He's had some difficulties, health-wise, but I mean, he's a wonderful, man of the Lord. But, they actually took the guy who ran the class, brought in his beat-up car, I use the term loosely, more like a shell, and said, you will make this car run. That is your class project. You'll be assigned to bring something in. If you don't manage to bring it in, and no, you have to go and bring a new pot. You can scruff around your garage, something like that. If you come up with some part that's beat up, then you're going to be the one machine tooling it to make it what? Function. Okay, why? That's skills. You have kids leaving high school could be auto mechanics. They got rid of. I said the '60s got rid of stuff like that because they didn't like that. It made them feel bad because they felt they were inferior to the peasant. It aids the poor than a better system. Current system does not care about the poor. Voucher does care about the poor because the poor have access. Money goes with them. They can choose where the kid wants to go, and they're gonna want success. It's easy to achieve. The system will respond to their needs. So, and I bother someone from Voddie Baucham who died. I mean, great preacher. I've watched some of his sermons. It's sad I didn't meet him once because he did a chapel at North Gate. I was hoping he was going to come in again at some point in time. He was back from missionary to see, but it says we can't send your kids children to Caesar for the education. Surprised to come home as Romans. In this case, we could say pagans. Okay, problems with the credit system and the voucher system is mentioned by the NEA, the Neo-Keynesians. Now, in the gold is going to be the problem stated that the NEA and the Neo-Keynesians state. And the white is going to be the new classicist counter to that. Okay, these problems are potentially potential ethnic conflict. Every group goes to schools of their own choice. And now the premise is that each group will be taught to hate the other groups. Most groups don't really care about the other groups as long as they're left alone. There are exceptions, which I'm not going to go into because I don't feel like being kind. But most parents don't want their kids hating other people. They want their kids protected, learn stuff like that, and the schools be doing that. So when people say there's potential ethnic conflict, I'll go to schools, own group, they don't know each other. The counterpoint is new classicalists say the current public schools teach more ethnic hatred than the parents want. In other words, you have second and third generation Americans whose children will learn to ruthlessly hate the United States because the school system teaches them. Keep in mind, a lot of our school system policy has been made by communists who say the United States is an evil, oppressive country. So yes, they're going to teach ethnic hatred, anything that will bring down the United States. And so the new classicals say, guess what? The current system already teaches ethnic and racial hatred far more than any parents want. In any group, going across groups, the parents want it less than the school system teaches it. No national unity is promoted. There's nothing internal to a credit system that will create a national common feeling among the population. That is true. A credit system does not. That depends what the parents want a national unity. The credit system will promote it. Whatever they're going to do, the school's going to reflect the parents' values, not a national system value. But again, the current system teaches disdain for the nation, while on average, parents in the United States, people who have children, tend to like the nation. Excuse me. The people who tend to hate the country most are people who don't have children, the dinks. But then they'll be the most entitled. That's always the funniest thing. They have no children, but the most entitled is saying somebody else's children owe me a living when I get old. Why? But in terms of it's not. But the current system teaches a disdain, a hatred for Americans. A great example of this. This is Pappy Boyington. This is one of my childhood heroes. This guy. It's like they once had a TV show for 2 years based on what he did in World War II. All right. This is a cool guy. Congressional Medal of Honor winner. Not perfect, a very, very colorful person. He used a number of, special words, shall we say. He was born poor. In fact, he was a mixed race person. That does not showing as well as I'd like. He was mixed race. He was of white and Native American. Hardy, in fact, the way he ended up going to college, the University of Washington, was under a military scholarship. In terms, he went and joined the military, became a flyer and stuff like that. All right. The state of Washington University was going to erect a statue in honor of him because he was a poor guy, again, mixed race, Native American, white, and the students all came out and it's practicing. Oh, we can't have another statue to a dead rich white man. Well, he may have died, better off, but he was born poor. And he wasn't a white dude, he was mixed race. Now, I don't care if he's white, black, plaid, or whatever, he was American. But they were taught to hate him. In fact, that's where they taught the Pacific War, his war of racist American aggression against the poor Japanese people. You know what happened to him during the war? He was shot down. He was captured by the Japanese. Now, he was a stocky man. He was 5'8". He was an older pilot. He was in his late 30s. That's why he was called Pappy. It's because he was over a decade older. Because usually pilots were a bunch of young men. He was the old salt. But he was called Pappy. He weighed 180 plus pounds when he was captured by the Japanese. When the war ended and he was released, he weighed about 73 pounds. Like most American prisoners, he was starved to death. He lived, but in terms of excuse me, that's what the public school system taught those kids to hate an American war hero. They hate a man who put his life on the line to keep the country free. The Pentagon itself called first responders, police and firemen who react to crisis, called them inhuman. Keep in mind, we're talking the Pentagon where most of the generals believe in communism, which is why all those generals should be fired and banned, not just from being in the U.S. military, they should be banned from being on any firm that contracts with the government because they are hostile. This one's always fun. Parents not knowledgeable enough to make the right decision what kids should do. This is one you'll hear a lot. Parents too stupid. Again, really, the NEA endorsed communism and terrorists, well after it was proven communism doesn't work, and it was known these people were terrorists. So, who doesn't know what it is? In fact, the NEA doesn't even know what a male and female is. I'm sorry. There's male and female. That's it. That's the species we are. There's a male sex, there's a female sex, that's it. If you don't know the difference between male and female, are you really knowledgeable? Because they'll say, oh, the parents too stupid. Most parents, in fact, most common people knew communism doesn't work, don't do it. Terrorists, people do stuff like that, they're bad, don't support them. And you don't let males in the female locker rooms and stuff like that because, that's kind of tough. So people can't think, are they really knowledgeable? I picked on the Supreme Court justice who, when someone asked, do you know what a woman is? She goes, well, I don't have a degree in science, so I don't know what a woman is. Lady, you gave birth twice. 2 human beings came out of your body. You a female. That's it. You should know that. Now, that you're saying you don't know what it is tells me you're lying or you're stupid. I don't know if anyone's that stupid, so you're lying for whatever political reasons there is. But that means, can I trust that person to say, this is women's area, or these are women's sports, or that's a men's area? And that's what, can I trust it? No, because she don't even recognize this difference. There's no national planning coordination education system. That's right. In fact, New Classical say that is a beauty. We depend on the market to solve the problem, and the market will solve the problem. National planning never solves anything. Even when you see something coming out, the national planners have not solved it. They make it worse. Markets create prosperity, plentiful, full stores. Planning creates shortages, mass starvations, deaths, and stuff like that. That the planners never have it right, but the planners never pay for having it right. So, no, we do it this way. Europe has a number of different problems, doing Europe problems real fast. In Europe, they have few, and particularly a lot of Europe's problems, they don't have as much as K through 12 as we do, although they have the creeping green infection that's caused a lot of damage, particularly in England and stuff like that, but also in Germany. The French have managed to limit their greens causing damage because in France, once you say you want to get rid of nuclear power, they say you don't want a job in the French government and they fire you as a teacher and stuff like that. Because that's how the French have cheap power is nuclear. But Europe has, they have a lot fewer college slots than the United States does as percentage. So the top slots in Europe tend to go to the upper class who are connected and the bureaucrats, the upper bureaucrats. They tend to get the slots, which reinforces them being held on top. This has been true for over 40 years. The United States graduates more black college students from college than the UK does college students. Now keep in mind, the United States is doing it with that's African Americans, blacks, have the lowest rate of graduation from college of any group in the United States. But blacks in the United States have a higher number of people who graduate from college than the percentage in Britain does. Not even the percentage, we actually graduate more black students than Britain does. In other words, 36 odd million African Americans graduate more students than a population of 60 plus million. So we have more slots. It makes it easier. In fact, when we do corruption, the next set always peeves me because corruption creates barriers. It creates a high cost society, which again the elites always want because it's easier to have a nepotism system. Europe has a lot of people who be professional students. People can be in Europe and be in a school system as a college student, grad student for years, even decades. And you can receive a stipend in Europe for being in college. So just stay in and be college. Have fun. Professional set of agitators. We have this in the United States, but the Europeans pay for these things more. So they'll have college students who basically just go around constantly and protest everything. Those people who glue themselves to works of art and stuff like that. That's paid for by their tax dollars. It's like if the United States and Europe treated them the way the Japanese did their hippies, which was a very violent movement back in the 60s and 70s. We have no problem with those people now because you know what the Japanese did with their hippies? When they did protest, they arrested the leaders, and the leaders were told they're now banned from any occupation. Any high-paying occupation they're now banned from. Oh, they could be janitors and street sweepers and stuff like that, but they could not be CEOs, they could not be teachers, they could not go to grad school. They were just wiped out. Developing countries. Now, this is an interesting one. I always like doing this because these are the countries that have the most sending of highly skilled migrants. So it's the brains. This is brain drain. I'm going to finish off with brain drain here. But like a lot of countries have people leave. This is ones who are sending. They're highly educated. The people with upper level degrees, college degrees, master's degrees, PhDs, leaving your country. Now, for the longest time, China and India and the Philippines had this. You used to have places like, Indonesia, which you can't see in a map and stuff like that. Yes, you understand why they have that. They have large populations, and they do what? If I leave from China and I go to Singapore, right? Whew, my income, may double, and I have no insecurity. Same thing. If I'm Indian, I can earn more money in Britain or Spain or the United States or Canada or Brazil than I can in India. So I do what? I leave India. So it makes sense for those countries. Germany, United Kingdom. Those places directly pay better. They have brain drain. They have people leaving. It's UK sends a lot of people to Canada, the United States, Australia, New Zealand, other European countries. So do the Germans. In other words, they just leave because why? They earn more money. In other words, you're German, you come to the United States, you earn more money. Now you earn more money, but the cost of living is a lot cheaper. Even if you're in one of the most expensive places, okay, except for like New York and San Francisco, which are equivalent to Berlin and stuff like that, your cost of living becomes cheaper. In other words, because one, energy is like 1/5 the price. Food is cheaper. So in other words, everything becomes cheaper by coming to the United States. They do what? They come to the United States. They flee. I say flee, and I don't mind if they come as long as they don't want to make us a communist country. Okay, that's the end of this education section. Thank you very much.